So we had a wonderful discussion with a range of global experts on ways to broaden GDP and our measures of development, from things like the HDR to the Multidimensional Poverty Index or the OECD's Better Life Index. I think what became very clear in our discussion is that there are many alternative proposals in existence that better capture human development than something which just measures productivity and money and wealth. And also that recognize that human development is about flourishing and about well-being, not just about our economic growth and progress. And I think a key takeaway for me was that cutting across all those proposals and the discussion was that there were two key principles that we really need to keep hold of. Whatever we ultimately come up with as an alternative to GDP, we need to think about having a measure that reflects two ideas. The first is the idea or concept of regeneration. I think it's fair to say that we've moved beyond the concept of sustainability today. Our world is not sustainable. Our current economic system is not sustainable. So instead, we need to shift our focus to thinking about how we can regenerate our economies, our societies, our environment, and move towards a more sustainable system. And then secondly, we need to focus on equity, and whatever measures we might have of economic development, we need to think about fairness and distribution and make sure that we capture that in how we assess the quality of our development.
GDP needs to be complemented by other measures to fully understand the societal progress and well-being, as it overlooks critical factors like income distribution, environmental depletion, unpaid labor, human rights, and peace. So capturing the complexity of well-being and sustainability with a small set of indicators is challenging. So there have been many studies and initiatives on measures beyond GDP. One review alone listed over 500 such initiatives. However, a careful chosen set of indicators can balance complexity and simplicity, making it practical and understandable. So key lessons from the SDG process can inform the development of beyond GDP measures. It needs to be developed through an inclusive and participatory process that engage a wide range of stakeholders, including the governments, civil society, the private sector, and academias, ensure the diverse perspectives and widespread buy-in. They should feature clear and universally applicable goals and targets addressing issues from poverty to gender equality, climate change, so creating a common framework for all countries. The most important is high-level political commitment, including the endorsements by all member states of the United Nations. It helps mobilize resources and sustain the momentum. Extensive public awareness and advocacy campaigns also can help galvanize support. So therefore, the future initiative should be inclusive, universal, and supported by strong partnership and high-level political will.
I would say the key takeaway from me was that researchers are clearly thinking about advocating alternative indicators to GDP, whether it's the inclusive wealth index or whether it's other additional. I mean, there's just the technology allows so much innovation in this space. So that's sort of one thing. If I'm allowed two, I think the second point is that there is a discernible lack of engagement with the actual process of deciding what are agreed indicators, particularly at the level of the United Nations. Around the SDGs, there's a current call that's open for researchers to engage to help the United Nations system improve their indicators. And I think that's where the conversation, I feel like there's a disconnect between these 2 points, what the researchers are developing and what the needs of the policymakers are.
I think that we heard that it's really crucial to better understand future emerging health risks, such as pandemic zoonotic influenza or dengue fever, or Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever in order to better anticipate them. You know that many of these risks are zoonotic or vector-borne diseases, and environmental factors will increase this risk in the coming years. For example, very simple thing, vectors like mosquitoes and ticks are very highly dependent of environmental conditions like temperature, humidity, and vegetation. And their, I would say, geographical and temporal pattern will be modified by climatic change, leading to change in the interaction with both pathogens and domestic animals and humans. So climate change will also increase cross-species viral sharing and transmission risk because it modified ecological niche of the pathogens, of the vectors, and on the host, and the evolution capacity of pathogens. But climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are already impacting health system, either with a direct effect through heat waves, for example, or effect on reproduction, psychological disorders, whatever, or by aggravating infectious disease burden in general through the increase of occurrence, but also by increasing the vulnerability of people, of the population. For example, if you take the air pollution, which induces chronic respiratory diseases, it's also a major vulnerability for emerging respiratory pandemics. So altogether, we can see that the definition of health itself should now take into account our changing and very interconnected world. And accordingly, countries will have to set up health systems that really targeting the current global challenge of health, climate, and biodiversity.
My key takeaway from the session was the extreme importance of understanding Global South to Global South migration. In the media, there's a strong narrative that the Global South is all moving to the Global North, that Global North is the only destination. But that's not true. That's not what the empirical evidence is showing, and that's what we discussed in the panel, that there are more people moving from Global South to Global South than there is from Global South to Global North, and that will continue to be the trend. But if we don't understand that, if we're not looking at this more lateral move, then there's a significant group of people and a significant group of impacts, whether it be economic, social, or cultural, that's being missed. So I think the panel was really trying to emphasize that we need to look at the empirical evidence and see that Global South and Global South is what's happening and where we should focus our attention.
Well, one key takeaway for me was really the essential importance of considering health when we're considering adaptation to environmental change like climate change, but also mitigation, cutting emissions. There are big benefits from both adaptation responses to help create more resilient healthcare systems, for example, but also food systems and the other systems that underpin human health, but also big benefits from mitigation, like cutting air pollution from burning fossil fuels, for example, or moving towards more sustainable food systems. Now, the focus of the session was very much on adaptation, but both adaptation and mitigation are important.
Because of the complexity of this health risk, health risk analysis show that we need a global, multi-sectoral One Health approach, considering human health, animal health, and environment together as interconnected sectors. And this is a scientific approach of how understanding the interactions, which are very complex. And it has to be drawn on a very effective science base. And prevention, not only preparedness, bottom-up approaches with the involvement of communities in the field will have to target One Health surveillance system. Science-driven initiatives are really needed to be able to analyze and develop what we could call resilient and healthy territories, and also socio-ecological systems.
I think for heads of state and government and other leaders attending the Summit of the Future, firstly, absolutely there needs to be a firm recognition of this absolutely crucial role that scientists and technical experts can and must play in discussions about reform of the international governance system, new ways of measuring and monitoring development, and recognizing the complexity of the modern development challenges that we face and the transboundary nature of them. It's absolutely essential that you have people deeply steeped in understanding those complexities involved, and those are necessarily the people with the time and space to research these issues, like scientists and academics. So they need space and they need to be recognized and equally invited to participate in those proceedings and at the Summit of the Future. In terms of the discussion about GDP, I think there are two really key sort of non-scientific elements, if you will. We need to take a menu of options from the best minds, thinking about how you measure development and how you do it equitably, sustainably, and so on. But once you've got that menu or recipe of different options, you then need to think about two key things, which is really what heads of state and government can do at the Summit of the Future. Firstly is think about the institutional process. How do you get this to become a central topic in all of the big multilateral spaces where important decisions are being made? The only way it will gain enough political traction as to become a permanent feature of our economies and our society is if it is put front and centre of the UN General Assembly every year, but also the G7, the G20, the regional economic commissions, as well as becoming something that is, forcefully discussed amongst the international financial institutions, be that the World Bank or the IMF, and is baked into the way in which they operate. So first and foremost, I think we need to focus on institutional process. And then secondly, I would really encourage leaders to think about the fact that whilst this might feel like quite a technocratic subject area, and whilst measurement and monitoring feels like something that statisticians and academics should do, I actually think this is a very accessible topic for the general public, and we are doing a disservice to the general public if we don't engage them in this debate. I think, again, we can invite the experts to make proposals, but ultimately, if we want our entire economic system and our political systems to reorient away from this model of growth as economic productivity and towards something that's more inclusive and more sustainable, we need the general public to buy into this shift and to help us enforce it and to hold their leaders to account. So I really think there needs to be a meaningful engagement with the general public. And we saw during the Sustainable Development Goal negotiations from 2012 to 2015 that it is very possible to engage thousands of people in these very high-level international dialogues. And I would really invite heads of state and government and leaders to find a meaningful way of doing that, so that this becomes an open public discussion rather than something confined to just technocratic corridors.
Well, science is of central importance because it helps us to understand in a more rigorous way than we have in the past the impacts of environmental change on human health, which is really central, I think, to the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. So in addition to that, in addition to understanding the impact, science can also help with the solutions. The solutions can be divided into those which help us to adapt to environmental change and those that help us to mitigate, or in the case of climate change, cut emissions. And really we need to do both. We need to adapt to the changes that we can't prevent, but we also need to, as far as we can, to limit further destructive changes to our environment, which are undermining progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So science is essential. It isn't about a single scientific result. It's about synthesizing the best evidence from the whole body of scientific literature to tackle a specific problem.
So science and research stand as a vital pillar in our pursuit of the SDG by 2030. It offers invaluable solutions to our most pressing global challenges. For instance, breakthroughs in renewable energy technologies play a crucial role in combating climate change, which is relevant to SDG 7 and also SDG 13. Advancements in medical research can enhance healthcare access and outcomes, which is relevant to SDG 3. So moreover, the potential application of AI holds immense promise in advancing various SDG priorities such as education, health, climate change, gender equality, and inclusive prosperities. So my message to those attending the Summit of the Future is let's keep supporting and funding science and research, and also let's champion science and research, ensure they are integral to our strategy and action to meet the SDGs.
So I need to be careful in that in the role that I occupy. I can't give a direct message, but I can say show up. Number one, I think for the research community, especially, look at the agenda, see how it fits with the work that we're all doing, that you're doing, that we're all doing. I think that's a really important message. I think these events can be really, really overwhelming now. They weren't always the case, but it's, I guess, their popularity and their importance to the world of science, to society, means that they're just such big, big affairs. It's very easy to get lost in them. So look at the agenda, see what you want to be doing, engage. Engagement is becoming harder, find ways to do it. I think that's probably what I would say.
My message would be that we need to humanize all these statistics that we see. And one of the really interesting statistics for me in my field is that there is predicted to be $1 trillion in remittances being sent. They say 2050, but the year is ambiguous. But essentially, there's a large sum of money that gets sent around from migrants back home. But we don't look at the people behind this. Just like other statistics about people, we treat them as numbers, we treat them as abstract ideas, but really they are humans. And when it comes to migration and migrant remittances, these are real people working real jobs, often really hard and sometimes in dangerous situations, and they're taking that money and they're sending it home. So there's a lot of development potential. There's a lot of potential for that to be used to address the SDGs. We just need to remember that at the end of the day, these aren't just numbers and money. These are people. And that's my message.